Natasha, I'm the city lead. I'm really looking forward to handing things over to Darian today. As you probably know, he is the founder of Craigslist Foundation and a best-selling author of Nonprofit 101, and his newest book, Fundraising, thank you, Nonprofit Fundraising 101. So really looking forward to everything that he has to say. If you could...
Talking in the mic.
Yeah, and if you folks in the audience have any questions, we are live streaming this today, so if you have any questions, we'll just get Darian to repeat them for our live stream audience. Thanks so much, and join me in welcoming Darian today.
All right, thanks again everyone for joining us. My name's Darian Rodriguez-Heyman. Very happy to be here with all of you today, and also our at-home audience from around the country. And as I was saying just before we got started, what I wanted to do with the workshop today was really, I attempted to lift out some of the most salient, practical, easy to implement, and kind of actionable tips and tools from my new book. I just had a book come out in partnership with both the Foundation Center, AFP, and over 120 other experts and organizations that came out a couple weeks ago. It already became a bestseller, so it's doing really well. Very excited about that. And similar to my first book, which was called Nonprofit Management 101 and was largely based off the nonprofit boot camp I started when I was running Craigslist Foundation, I wanted to do something similar with this book, which was to be very comprehensive and yet intensely practical. As a recovering executive director myself, I know that everybody in the sector is way too busy, understaffed, under-resourced, and yet still trying to make as much social impact as possible happen. And so from my experience, the big nebulous ideas and concepts are interesting, but they're not the things that are most helpful for nonprofit leaders. What I find to be most helpful are the tips and tools. And the way I think of it is that if you leave this next hour and a half talk inspired, well, that's great, but in fact, I haven't done my job, because my job is not to inspire you, it's to inspire you to action. Meaning, what can you do differently an hour and a half from now that's going to make you more effective and more efficient at serving the community? And in particular, given the focus of the new book, the tips I'll be sharing are really squarely focused on all different disciplines and aspects of fundraising, from foundation work to individual donors to online giving, you name it. There's obviously a bunch more stuff in the book, but I wanted to take a few things out that you could put to work immediately that in general won't take you a lot of time, but will deliver a lot of results. So should we get into it?
Yeah.
All right. And again, I'm sorry if I talk a little fast. I do want to try to be respectful of everyone's time and end on time. So we'll have a lot of content to get through. But that said, if anything's not clear, if you have any questions at any point in time, feel free to shoot your hand up, interject, or if any of our home audience people want to put up their digital hand, that's great too. And so the first thing that I wanted to start with, because I feel like this is something that's really relevant whether you're trying to raise money from foundations, from individual donors, through the internet, or in person, whatever the channel is that you're looking to do fundraising, one of the will absolutely affect your ability to successfully raise resources is your ability to tell your own story. And in particular, the thing that I find over and over and over again, besides the fundraising work and social media work, I do a lot of messaging and positioning work with social change leaders. And my life's work, just so you know, is helping people help. So I work with leaders just like yourselves and connect you to the tips, the resources, the best practices, and the context that you need to maximize your impact. That's kind of what my dharma is on the planet. And as I've been doing that, I kind of constantly bump into the same situation, which is people are doing really great work, but they can't articulate why it's so important. And it's almost like they're so convinced themselves that this issue is so critical that they just assume the rest of the world gets that. And it doesn't, unfortunately, work that way. And so what I find, though, and this is not a complicated issue to fix, because almost always the problem looks almost identical. And it looks like this. It looks like someone asks you what you do, and you dive immediately into what you do, instead of taking 5 to 7 seconds, like one sentence literally, to articulate why it matters. What you believe, what's the world that you're trying to bring about. And then with that context, which doesn't have to be hugely elaborate, when you fill in the gaps with your story, with what you're doing about it, It adds really powerful context. So said another way, when it comes to getting your story straight, the thing that I would prescribe to 99% of nonprofits is not just to focus on the what, but really the so what. Not just what you do, but why it matters. Okay? And the point here is that as opposed to diving right into, and in certain instances, it is relevant to say we're a breast cancer organization and we focus on research. Right? That is a great articulation of what an organization may do, but especially when you're in the cocktail party or in that elevator, it's really helpful to say, we believe that every woman deserves the right to a thriving and vibrant life, and that they should be healthy until a ripe old age. So what we do about that is we're a breast cancer organization, and we focus on research because we've really discovered that's what's missing. Again, not a lot of content there, but really, really helpful. And so let me put this in a visual metaphor because I find this really helps. I went to the pyramids in Egypt, and as you can see, the base of the pyramid is much broader, right? What I find nonprofits do all the time, they start at the bottom of the pyramid and work their way up. Meaning, you start with all the details of what you do, and essentially leave it to the listener to reconcile why it's so important. Instead of starting at the top of the pyramid and working your way down, meaning giving them that context. This is why what we do is important, and this is what we're doing about that. So it's a really helpful way to do this. And maybe one final model or metaphor to really help you bring this home and remember it. Would you say that Dr. Martin Luther King was a dreamer, or was he a visionary? Anyone? Visionary? What's the difference?
He had a vision. He wasn't just like concocting this dream of, maybe we can do this, but this is what the world can look like if we all work together.
Exactly, right? So I would argue that he's both a dreamer and a visionary. And to your point, the difference is that he didn't just kind of hold out, this is what the world should look like. He gave us a pathway to get there. He talked about the specific steps that we need to take. And in my language, what I would say is the difference between a dreamer and a visionary is the B to the Y. And what I mean by that is A is the world as it is today with all its flaws and imperfections. Ballooning cancer rates or issues around the arts or education or whatever it may be, right? And it's a problem, and for the most part, you can mention it in about half a sentence, and people will inherently know what you're talking about, unless it's a very obscure cause. And then Z is the utopian vision of tomorrow, the world where every child is fed and clothed and educated, where there is no cancer, where everyone is free to fulfill their potential as a human being. That's great, very empowering, very inspiring, but also insufficient if we're really trying to change the world. Because what you need is the B to the Y, the steps of how to get from here to there. And that's what ultimately really differentiates the visionary from just a simple dreamer. Now, to translate that into helping you get your story straight, I would say that the best story ever told from a social impact standpoint has 4 parts. And you should be able to do this in about 30 to 45 seconds for your organization and for each of what I call your fundables, meaning general operating support, your group as a whole, each of your programs, and then all of the different ideas that if the right person walked up to you and said, here's $1 million or $40,000 or whatever that number is, you could launch a new initiative where it would really be strategic and advance your mission. So you should have a 30 to 45 second elevator pitch for each of those fundables so that at any point in time you're in the right elevator or at the right cocktail party, you can bust those out or in a meeting with a funder. And what each of those elevator pitches should look like is what's the problem that we're trying to solve? Usually about half a sentence is about all you need because it's inherently depressing, it's a downer, and it's something for the most part people are already familiar with. So you don't need to go into elaborate detail about the fact that the incarceration system in this country is a total mess and it's fundamentally unjust, and enough said, right? Similarly, the Z, the ultimate end goal, is it's great, and again, it's inspiring and empowering, but it's a little dreamy, right? And if you spend too long talking about that, you'll lose some credibility. But the point is, in 1 to 2 sentences, you should be able to cover these first 2 pieces so that you now have the context for the work that you are actually really here to do and how you're going to bring about that change. And this is 3 to 4 sentences, and typically you're talking kind of in buckets. So there's 3 things that we're going to do to eradicate breast cancer within our lifetime. We're funding research, we're working with cancer survivors so they can be a mentor network to other people, and we are creating a new program that, da-da-da-da. And each of those is a fundable, has its own story, and you could certainly go down each of those rabbit holes. But when your story is properly told, it should be a conversation, a dialogue instead of a monologue. And instead of you trying to say everything, you just it's almost like a good news story. You give them enough to get interested, and when you know it works is when they start asking questions. Oh, really, research? What kind of research? Oh, really, tell me more about this mentor group. Tell me more about that vocational program. Now you know that you've got a hook in there, and you're starting to have a conversation, right? So it's, what's the problem? What's the solution in short order? What are you doing about it? And then finally, what kind of support are you looking for? Well, we're looking for donors to help us underwrite this program. We're recruiting new members to our board, and we're also searching for in-kind supporters that can contribute hardware and software and corporate volunteer support. Whatever the case may be, right? But you're kind of talking in buckets, like I said, instead of trying to get too detailed. And being able to master this, again, not just for your organization as a whole, but for each of your fundables is really, really important. And that's why I wanted to put that as the first step. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is engaging your board in fundraising. Is that something that anybody has found challenging in the past? Yeah, just a little bit. Well, there's a reason for that. It's kind of like maybe the worst peanut butter and jelly sandwich ever made, because there was a study done by a group right here in San Francisco, Compass Point, if you're familiar with them. And what they discovered in their Daring to Lead study was that 50% of executive directors leave not only their job but the nonprofit sector within 5 years. 50%. Pretty scary number, right? Anybody guess what the number one reason why they get so frustrated they just walk out the door is? Board's actually number 2. The first one is what we're here to talk about today, which is fundraising, right? Frustrations around all the responsibilities and the weight on their shoulders for fundraising. Number 2 is frustrations around their board. And from my experience, you put the 2 of those together, like I said, the worst peanut butter and jelly sandwich ever, and you wind up with this issue of getting your board to fundraise. And that can be incredibly taxing and very difficult for a lot of groups. And in particular for me, coming from the background of when I was working at Craigslist Foundation, for the most part I was working with smaller grassroots organizations that were just getting started because someone had a personal passion for a cause. And that's great, and most people don't know 75% of the nonprofits in this country, there's over 1.5 million of them, have budgets underneath $100,000. So on the whole, we're a small grassroots sector, and what happens if you're lucky is you have a bold, charismatic enough leader that is able to marshal resources, that is able to put forth programs, that is able to raise money, now maybe they have staff, etc., and you go from having that kind of working board or the board that is really there in name only, because you need them to file the paperwork, to trying to get your board to be strategically engaged in fundraising and things like that. And that transition can be very difficult. The good news is there's kind of a institutional acupuncture points that I've discovered over the last 15 years that can really help smooth out this transition. And there's 2 documents that I can distribute free templates of. If you want to tweet at me, or I'll have my personal email and cell phone on the at the end of the presentation, I can share free templates of this with anybody that wants them. But these 2 documents are a board matrix and a board member agreement. And before I go into the details, let me just tell you why these are important and what the function of these 2 documents are. So the board matrix is really just a very simple tool. If you can't tell, I'm super into simple tools because we're all too busy. So it's a very simple tool that helps get consensus from the board and the leadership of the organization around what kind of board members are we looking for, right? If you are looking to expand your board, and we have lunch, and I'm a pretty well-connected guy, and I know a ton of people that want to support nonprofits or that are leading them. If you tell me about your breast cancer group, And then at the end of our lunch, you say, oh, by the way, we're recruiting a couple people to our board. Do you know anybody that might be relevant? Maybe I'll share a name or two, right? But if you say, hey, we're recruiting some people to our board, you don't happen to know a Latina lawyer with really good corporate connections and maybe a background in foundation fundraising, do you? Right? Like, when you do that, the likelihood of me being like, oh yeah, you need to talk to Maria, she's awesome. Right? Like, now you're getting exactly what you were looking for, and the likelihood of me giving you a name or a few names goes up exponentially. So the board matrix is the tool that will unlock that conversation, number one. But now you meet with Maria, you tell her about your group, right? And she says, oh, this is interesting, I really like what you're up to, and I'd love to learn more. Whether she asks it explicitly or not, she's going to want to know, what does joining your board entail? And the right answer does not take the form of a 200-page board packet with all your bylaws and past minutes and stuff. It's something super simple that in very clear language and bullet point format articulates what it means to be a board member. And oh, by the way, if this is something that all of the current board members have signed, that creates a huge amount of accountability and clarity of purpose for the existing board as well. So that's really the purpose of these two documents. Let's get into it. And they're both going to be a little hard for you to see on the screen, but let me just talk you through them. So the first one, this is the board matrix, right? Remember, the goal here is we want to be able to articulate the characteristics that we're looking for in new board members. So the first step in that exercise is a group discussion, certainly driven by the board, around, hey, it's 10 years from now and breast cancer has been solved thanks to our work. What does the board look like that got us there? What does our board look like? What's the ideal board 10 years from now? Well, we need men and women because we want diversity. We also want straight and gay. We want people in New York City and Atlanta and San Francisco because that's where our 3 offices are. We need someone who's loaded and who can write a 6-figure check every year. We need someone who is super tight with the celebrity crowd so we can get a celebrity spokesman. We want a doctor so that we have someone who really has scientific knowledge of the field. We want someone who's run a nonprofit before. We want a lawyer. We want an accountant. Whatever that list is, right? It's a brainstorming session. But then the point of the document, and it's a very simple spreadsheet, where, as you see, the columns are just your current board members and a couple of your top prospects that are in the pipeline. The rows are these characteristics. And what you're going to want to do is have that brainstorming exercise, what does our ideal board look like? And then try and put those things into buckets. So we've got buckets around diversity and demographics, buckets around geographic presence, their financial capacity, the strength of their network, their areas of expertise, etc. Yeah?
Do you recommend that initial brainstorming be inclusive of the current board, or start with the organization's sort of ED and key staff?
Great question. So should it be really driven by the ED or by the board? And really both of these tools need to be driven by the board. I can tell you from personal experience, being an executive director and walking into the board meeting and being like, we need to raise the bar and you guys are all dead weight and you need to deliver more and perform in these ways, like that conversation is never going well. So what you need to do instead is essentially, whether you're the ED, the director of development, whatever, get an ally on the board, especially the chair, maybe the governance chair if you have a committee. Convince them first and foremost of the value of the tool, never mind the specifics, and then they need to be the one to present it to their peers at the board meeting and say, we are entering a bold new chapter of this organization's development, and we need more infrastructure, and we need clarity of purpose in terms of what it means to be a board member. We also need clarity of what kind of members we're looking to recruit as we take this thing to the next level. Oh, that sounds pretty good. Sure, I'm on board with that. Okay, well, here are the 2 tools that we heard will help us get there. Tool number 1, what does our ideal board look like? And it's a discussion driven by the board. The ED, the director of development, can certainly have some input there, but it's pretty critical that they own it. Otherwise, they're never going to internalize it in a big way, especially the next tool that we'll talk about in a second. But the point is, they're the ones really coming up with this brainstorm, and they're also the ones putting the X's down. So at a board meeting, once you have this tool in place, you distribute this piece of paper, and everyone just checks the boxes under their names that are relevant. I'm Latino. I have a background in nonprofit management. I love fundraising. I have foundation connections. I can write a big check, whatever it might be. And now you've got all these X's, and in about 5 minutes you can look and see, hey, we don't have anybody who's loaded on the board. Hey, we don't have anybody who has celebrity connections. Hey, we only have one person who really knows how to write grants and knows foundation fundraising, and that's our core strategy moving forward. And ultimately what you're looking for is sort of like, what are the 3 things that are at the top of your wish list? We want the Latina lawyer with the strong corporate connections. Right? And that's what everybody gets into lockstep around, so that when the entire board and the staff are out there in the community talking to well-connected people that might know a Maria, they know that you're telling them the same thing. And hopefully through that process, the likelihood of finding her goes up exponentially. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So let's go into the board member agreement. Again, you're not going to be able to read this, don't worry, you're not old. But the point here is, again, we are looking to create a document, in fact, a contract. It's an agreement that every board member is signing along with the board chair, and that anybody who's considering joining the board, this is the key document that you're going to share with them as they really get ready to come on board. Okay, and what this document does is it lays out in very plain language, completely objective language that's black or white, exactly what it means to be on the board. And there's a few things that are important here. Number 1, it's short. It's no more than 2 pages, right? And here's a tiny snippet about what our group exists to do, because by now they already know that. But more importantly, and as a member of the board of directors, I agree to the following responsibilities, : and now you've got a bullet point list. And by objective, I mean, like I said, black or white. So it is not appropriate to have something like, I will make a good faith effort to attend all board meetings. Because at the end of the year, you think you made a good faith effort because you made it to that one meeting, and I think you were a really bad board member that was completely absentee, and you only made it to one board meeting. But who's right? Neither of us, because there's no objective criteria. As opposed to, I will attend 75% of all board meetings, in person or by phone. I will make a minimum contribution of $5,000 a year. Or, in fact, what I recommend to about 95% of nonprofits, especially those that have a diverse board, maybe you're one of the 3% of nonprofits in this country that has a board member underneath the age of 30, or the 8% of groups that have a board member under the age of 50. There's a little truth to the old white men on the board kind of story that you might have heard. It's kind of true, and especially given the amount of groups that focus on serving youth and that work with diverse populations, you really should consider creating a board that embodies the community you're here to serve, and that last tool will help you get there. But the point is, so you're articulating this, and if you do have a diverse board, you've got a student who's in college, and you've got a billionaire who's sold 3 companies already, what's your minimum donation amount going to be? Is it $20? Because the student is not going to write a big check, and that's okay. Right? The whole point here is, what I would recommend is what's known as a personal capacity gift, as defined by really simply 2 things. It should be the largest gift they can comfortably make, and one of their top 3 philanthropic investments of the year. If you're giving more money to 3 other groups, then join their board. Right? So keep it super simple, but the idea here is, and this is kind of the Jedi mind trick, the real reason why most development directors and EDs want to implement this document, is to get to 100% board participation in fundraising. Because a lot of groups don't have a board where every single member contributes. And this goes back to would you ever buy pots and pans from a salesman that doesn't buy them himself? Not really. Well, would you ever give to a group where the board member isn't even contributing? Right? It's just that really inhibits your ability to fundraise. And this is a big part of kind of the story as you roll this out to the board and to that chair or president. And it's about, we are entering this next stage of our development. We're going to take our efforts to the next level. We're going to raise more money. We're going to expand our programs. And as we do that, and especially as we start going after bigger foundation grants, we will be asked, what is our board participation in fundraising? Or in another way, what percentage of your board contributes? The right answer is 100%, the wrong answer is anything other than that, right? And if a foundation asks you that and you don't say 100%, you're done. You don't want that to happen. Do you want that to happen, Mrs. Board Member? No. Okay, well then, write us a check. Doesn't even have to be a certain amount, just the largest gift you can comfortably make and one of your top 3 investments of the year. That's fair, right? So, it is really critical that we get to 100% board participation, and that's one of the things that will happen from this. You could also use this to create committees, to establish a sense of how many hours a month is the commitment. 5 hours pro bono a month, 5 hours a week. I will serve on a committee. I will do 1 site visit a year. Whatever the things are that are really critical. You don't want a huge list, again, no more than 2 pages, but pick those kind of points that are really critical from an engagement standpoint, and then have every member sign it with the board member, with the board chair. And as you're recruiting new people, this is the document that lays out what's expected of you. And oh, by the way, if you're one of the few nonprofits that really has internalized one of the most important best practices from a board development standpoint, which is annual board reviews, in the ideal world, and it's not a lot to ask, one of the key responsibilities for your board chair, and it'd be great to have a job description like this for each of your executives, by the way, is that they're going to do a one-on-one board review with each member of the board. Could be a phone call or in person. And guess what? Instead of saying like, I'm sorry, you really weren't a great board member, I wish we could get you more engaged, and here you're thinking like, well, wait a minute, I thought I was, I contributed quite a bit. Like, that's what you want to avoid. Use this as the basis for that annual review. Did you attend 75% of all meetings? Yes. Did you make a personal capacity gift? Yes. Did you serve on a committee? No, because I had a kid this year and I had a health concern, and okay, that was just a one-off thing. Now that it's done, we'll get back on track. Or actually, you know what? My promotion at work has led me to a point where I really can't do that, even moving forward, in which case it facilitates a very graceful and objective conversation about maybe we should look at transitioning you into a different role like an advisor, and still keep you as a donor and as one of our biggest fans and supporters. Right? I've used this document to get a $30,000 gift from a board member as I was in the process of kicking him out because he wasn't really doing anything. Like, I don't know another way that could have happened. So this tool can be really, really effective, and it makes it incredibly graceful and objective. It's not personal anymore. It's just, here's the checklist of what you need to do. Oh, you missed 3 of these, and you're not about to fix that anytime soon. Great. Let's look at something else. All right. We're at the Foundation Center, so we need to talk about foundation fundraising, which is actually one of my favorite areas of expertise and one of my favorite things to talk about, in particular because I feel like most nonprofits do this really wrong, and they waste a lot of time, they get really frustrated, and as a result they kind of throw up their hands in despair and say, oh, forget it, we tried raising money from foundations and grant writing, and it was a huge waste of time, so we don't do that anymore. Like, I've heard that so many times. Anybody in the audience brave enough to raise their hand? Anybody not writing grants because you found it too frustrating? All right. I see all the hands going up at home. So in my mind, the reason why so many nonprofits get turned off and sort of think that the ROI just isn't there and it's a huge waste of time is, in short, because, at least based on my definition, they're doing it wrong. Right? And when you do it wrong, from what I've seen, your success rate is about 5%. So you go out there, you come to the Foundation Center, you spend a ton of time identifying the top 50 foundations that are perfectly targeted for your cause. And then you invest thousands of hours filling out these robust online applications and kind of spraying and praying and, hoping you get one of those grants. And maybe you do get one of them. But you've invested thousands of hours and it just doesn't add up. So that $3,000 grant isn't really worth it, so you say forget it. But that's because you spent a huge amount of time and you had a 5% success rate, and the tips that I want to share will get you from 5% to 50%, and in fact you'll save time in the process as you bring your success rate up. So historically, half of the grants that I've ever applied for, I've received, and the reason is I never show up to a party I haven't been invited to, right? Only apply for grants that you are invited to apply for. Now, there are plenty of professionals that will disagree with me on this point, and especially if you're going after government grants, there's a big asterisk there. Also, sometimes with grants where, the old saying is if you've seen 1,000 foundations, you've seen 1,000 foundations. So they really do vary widely, but personally, I just don't find it to be a good use of time to sort of like send out a really well-written grant proposal to a perfectly targeted foundation with zero personal connection, because your odds are 5%, and that's probably being generous. As opposed to, I get invited to apply, and I'll share a couple additional pieces of information that get me a yes 50% of the time. And it's essentially because I pre-sold that grant.
How do you make yourself invited?
We're going to get into that.
Okay.
Right? We're going to get into that. But the idea is, let's say she's a program officer. And for those of you that don't know, program officers kind of foundation speak for the person who oversees a particular area of giving at the San Francisco Foundation. She runs their environmental program, and you're trying to increase composting rates in the city, right? And she's got a composting program. She should absolutely be funding your effort. But if you send in that grant cold, very low chance you're going to get it, right? Now let's say she's in the room, and as you're walking out the door, you're like, oh, you run a composting grant-making program. I do a composting thing. And she says, oh, that's great. Get me a grant. Get me a proposal. That's wonderful, but just to be clear, your odds of success have not gone from 5 to 50%. They've gone from about 5 to 10. Because you've gotten the invitation, but just like if you get invited to a party, you need to know what to wear, what's the address, what time does it start. There's additional pieces of information, not a lot of them, but let me share what those are in order to get you to 50%. And then we'll also talk about how to get in the door, because that can be very difficult as well. So, in general, we're looking for the invitation to apply. That is kind of the umbrella goal that we're shooting for. But again, like I just said, you bump into someone in the hallway, you talk to them for 5 or 10 seconds, and they say, sounds great, get me a proposal. My response would not be, oh, thank you so much, I'd be happy to. It would be, oh, thank you so much, but before I send it in, I do have just a couple quick questions. Do you have a sec to chat now, or can we set up a call or a meeting, maybe next Tuesday at 4 p.m.? Right? Like, get that call or that meeting within which you're looking for about 4 pieces of critical information. And the first one, this is mostly intended for the guys in the room that, like me when they were kind of first learning how to cook in college, would like throw spaghetti at the wall to see if it sticks, and that's how you know if it's done. It's the pasta test. And the idea is what you're looking for is the what and the why, the programs and the positioning. So not just get me a proposal, but get me a proposal for your composting program and for your vocational training program. Right? So that's the what. The why is that a fit? Right? And so the idea here is, first off, before you have that call or that meeting, you're doing your homework. The thing that program officers hate more than anything else is someone who walks into a meeting with them, which are kind of hard to get, and we'll get into some of those tips in a second, and they haven't done their homework. And they ask them really simple questions that you should have been able to find out looking at their website or their annual report. Right? That drives them nuts, and odds are you're not going to get an invitation, and they really won't want much to do with you, because you're being disrespectful of their time, which is very valuable. Everybody's trying to get in with these folks, right? So what you want to be doing instead is, having done your homework, you essentially want to identify a couple what I call level 2 questions. Meaning, these are questions that address 2 goals at the same time. They sort of show the teacher that you've done your homework and allow you to show off being a smarty pants a little bit. But number 2, they also get you information that you can't find on their website or in their annual report. So it's, wow, it's really been amazing to learn about your efforts promoting, a solution to homelessness over the last 100 years. But I have to ask, there's so many organizations working in the field now. What was it that first connected you and your founder and your organization to this cause at your inception? Great information, right? In general, what you're looking for in the first phase of your conversation, and this is also true for donors, as it is with institutions, is you're doing what's called an appreciative inquiry process. where you're looking to really wrap your head around what motivates his giving, her giving, right? Where's this person coming from, and why do they care about this issue? Because in the back of your mind, what you're looking for is, why are we a fit? What's the contextual relevance of what we're doing, and how can I frame it in a more powerful way in a language that you care about? So that's the first thing you're doing in the conversation. Once you've done that, the next step is the pasta test, is to figure out, here are my different elevator pitches. Remember that first tip we talked about? And let's say you've got 7 fundables, starting with general operating support. Now let's say you've got 3 programs, and then you've got 3 other ideas that if the check were big enough, you'd love to launch, right? So you've got 7 arrows in your quiver. Based on my research at the Foundation Center and through their website, 4 of them are really the ones that I think are going to be most relevant. So now I'm going to spend about 3 minutes throwing each of those 4 at the wall, and hopefully there's going to be some kind of resonance. I'm looking for a tuning fork effect where he's going to say something along the lines of, oh, well, that's really interesting that you guys are focused on working with the homeless, because we believe that everyone in the city of San Francisco has the right to fulfill their entire potential as a human being. And I also find your vocational training program incredibly interesting and relevant, because one of our core beliefs is helping people help themselves, or something like that, right? And what you're listening for and what you're writing down very diligently in your notes are 2 things, the what and the why. And you're listening for, oh, he said that he's open to general operating support and our vocational training program. And almost more importantly, because this is the stuff that you never find on their website, is the language they use to articulate why that thing is a fit. Because we believe that we want to help people help themselves, or we want to help people fulfill their potential. Those little phrases tend to be the things that he will be talking about with his peers, with his board, when he goes to get this grant approved. And it's the language they use internally, but it's not necessarily in any of their materials. And guess what? You want that language in your proposal. So you're listening very diligently for the what and the why. And now we know, okay, he's open to general operating support. He's open to vocational training program. We have a rationale for each. We're getting there. We're about halfway through. We've got 2 more things we're going to ask him. Oh, well, that's great. Thanks so much for your interest in our organization and our homeless program. Just so you know, our budget next year is $1 million. Do you think a $250,000 request would be realistic, or would $125,000 be more reasonable since we'd be a first-time grantee? Question mark, pause. Right? They call it an ask for a reason, and that's because it has to end in a question mark. And I would add, and a pause, because ultimately he's the next person that you want to speak, right? And this is true with individual donors as well. And the point is, based on your research, if you know that they give out grants that are $20,000 to $30,000, then by all means you don't want to ask him for $250,000, because he'll laugh you out of the room, and once again, it's clear you haven't done your homework. So if you know they give out $20,000 to $30,000 grants, I would probably give him a range of like $30,000 to $50,000, right? So I'm intentionally overshooting their standard range, because the goal here is really to get the largest invitation possible. The way to do that is to be reasonably overshooting, so that he responds and says, well, gosh, even $30,000 would be too much for something like this, especially because you're a first-time grant seeker. I would say 15 is probably in the realm of possibility, maybe as high as 25K. Great, in your notes you're writing $25,000 down. If he gives you a range back, which is typical, you're listening for the number at the high end of the range, because that's the number in your proposal. And then you're going to do the same thing for each of the fundables that resonated. Oh, that's great. Happy to put that into a proposal for you. I'm also really excited to hear that you're interested in our vocational training program. The budget for that initiative next year is $100,000. Do you think that's something that your foundation would be in a position to underwrite completely, or would a $50,000 request be more realistic? Question mark, pause. Right? And again, do your homework and use that information to slightly overshoot. If you're working in a vacuum and by some chance you don't have a sense of what kind of size grant is reasonable, I would say the 2 formulas are, for general operating support, I would ask them to underwrite 1/4 of your next year's budget with a fallback option of half that amount. And for a specific program or initiative, I would ask them to fund the whole damn thing, all of next year's budget, with a fallback of half of that, followed by a question mark and a pause. And then he's probably going to give me a range in response, and I'm listening for the number at the high end of that range. Right? So now we have the two things he's interested in funding, why he's interested in funding both, and a specific dollar amount associated with both of those asks. The final piece, and I call this the Jedi mind trick because it kind of doesn't make sense. It's a little counterintuitive. I've used this so many times, I can't even count. And I've also been up on stage with a program officer who got 300 requests for 30 grants that she was able to administer. Of the 30, 20 of them did this trick. And again, it's a little counterintuitive, but it works. So the final thing I'm going to ask him is, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for your interest in our programs and in this vocational training initiative. Happy to get you a proposal. One last question for you. Would you mind taking a look at a draft of our proposal before we formally submit it? Not that sensical, I get it. But here's the deal. Coming from the perspective of someone who's been on the board of a small foundation that gives out grants, and I've been in that boardroom when we're talking through the grants, it's all about the personal connection. And what you're really looking for, and probably one of the biggest determinants of your success, is if you have a champion, an ambassador in that room. And that's a board member, that's a program officer, a staffer. And guess what? If out of the 10 grants on that slate, he's really only passionate and endorsing 3 of them, those 3 are getting approved without any cuts. The other 7, depending on if they're a good fit and if someone else is a champion, but those 3, nobody wants to tell him, he's working his butt off every day, oh, actually, we don't care that you're passionate about this one, I don't think it's that great. Like, even if that's true, I still don't want to do that and undermine your passion and confidence and, So getting someone to essentially adopt your proposal and really endorse it is really powerful. And for whatever reason, this little trick works really well. What I would say, having done this many times, is they almost always say yes and agree to review a draft, and they almost never actually do it. And that's okay, because the real goal is to get them to adopt you, not to get their edits in there, add a comma here, change this or that. So know that going into it, expect it to be a final draft when you submit it, and also ask them, hey, I know your grants are due on April 1st, but since you've agreed to take a look at this in advance, would March 15th be okay for you and give you enough time? So you'll need kind of a new deadline. So just ultimately, like big picture, think about the difference of what we're talking about here. On one hand, you've come to the Foundation Center, you've done all this research, you've identified the exactly perfectly targeted foundations, and you've spent tons of time putting together the best grant proposal ever. Right? 5% success rate. On the other hand, we have come to the Foundation Center, do your research, pick a pretty narrow and targeted list of 20 or 30 foundations, get in the door, get invited to apply for a specific program or set of programs with a rationale behind each, a budget and a specific dollar amount behind each, and he's agreed to review a draft of your proposal before you formally submit it. 50%. Right? That's the difference. And very quickly, sir, to get back to your question about how do you get in the door and get the invitation to apply, I'd say there's basically 3 ways. The best way is leveraging a personal relationship. So if you know someone at that foundation, and you can also use LinkedIn to figure that out. If you know anybody there, if you're a degree away. If you don't, look up in the Foundation Center database, they've got, here's their staff and their board. Email that list out to your whole team. All your advisors, your board members, your staff. Anybody know any of these people? Oh, I went to college with that guy. Great, can you send an email to introduce me? Hands down, by far the best way to get in the door. Option number 2, believe it or not, is to use Twitter. And to build up your social capital and to start, following that program officer, that foundation, start retweeting their messages, start being a provocative thought partner. Oh, that's interesting that you believe that. Have you seen this article? Like, build up your subject matter expertise. And then after a little bit of flirting like that, oh, by the way, given all these posts that you're sending out, I think you really might be interested in learning about our initiative that blah, 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 blah. Would you have 10 minutes for a quick phone call or meeting? Right? Now you've kind of preheated the oven. And then barring that, the third option is to stalk them. And I'm only half joking, because what I mean by that, is you know this person's name, you know who the program officer is, that's the decision maker you're looking for. You have zero personal relationship. They're not on Twitter. You can't build a relationship. I actually would suggest setting up a Google alert. It's a free tool, google.com/alerts. Anytime that person's name or that phrase pops up on the internet, you'll get an email. Oh, hey, Bob Jones is going to be accepting an award at this banquet. Oh, maybe I'll go there. Maybe I'll just happen to bump into him in the hallway and be like, oh, Bob, I've seen that great work you're doing in homelessness. Let's talk. Now I've got a personal relationship and I'm back to door number one. Right? And it oftentimes, unless they have a policy against unsolicited proposals, I also will call, like I've got this short list of 20 foundations that I know are our perfect targets. Instead of spending all those hours sending out those unsolicited proposals, I will spend them calling him 2 or 3 times a week, only leaving a voicemail every 2 or 3 weeks. But this is the stalker part, right? So, but I'll be trying him to see if I can get through. And then every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, it's the borderline between persistent and annoying. I'll leave him a voicemail. Hey, still trying to reach you. Would love to talk to you about our homeless initiatives. I think it'd be an interesting fit for you. Any chance you're free next Thursday at 4? Super short, 2 to 3 sentences. The only goal is getting a call or a meeting. Very top line of what it's about. The only goal is the meeting, and I'll send a follow-up email just saying, still trying to meet up with you. Hope you're doing well. Can I get that meeting? And it's the water on the stone, just kind of wearing them down. All right. Anybody know this guy in the light suit in the middle here? He is the grandfather of professional fundraising. His name is Hank Rosso. And he is really the one credited with founding the field of professional fundraising. He started AFP, he started the fundraising school at Indiana University, and one of the things he's most famous for saying is the number one reason why people don't give,
They're not asked.
because they're not asked, right? And so going back to this notion of an ask, like I said, it has to end in a question mark and a pause, otherwise it's not an ask. But a couple other things as it relates to individual donor cultivation and stewardship and making that actual ask. First off, just like we talked about with foundations, the first thing you're going to want to do in that conversation, in that meeting, is build up a rapport. And not only create a personal connection, but try to get in their head a little bit about why do they really care about education or the arts or breast cancer, or you want to know about that personal connection. You want to know what led them to be so passionate that they started a whole organization about this cause. Right? That's going to dictate their giving and their support and their engagement. Once you have that, you give your contextualized pitch, that little pasta test where you're giving the elevator pitch and looking for resonance. And once you identify that resonance, you go deeper down those rabbit holes. That's really where your conversation goes. And guess what? They're the ones leading it. So you're going to focus your talk on what they care about, not on everything that you think is important. And that's going to be a much more engaging conversation for them. And hopefully they're also going to give you some ideas and input. I once heard, if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money. Okay? So invite them to give you their input, and the money may very well follow. And ultimately it needs to culminate in, thank you so much for your interest in our efforts. I would love to invite you to join me in supporting our cause by supporting us with a check for $50,000 today. Is that something that you'd be comfortable with? Question mark, pause. There's a number, and there's an impact associated with that number. Whether it's to our programs, whether it's to help us build this new building, or launch this new center, or feed 1,000 children, or whatever it is, right? I'm in the process now of doing a campaign to provide clean drinking water to 3,500 people in Africa. Right? For $3,500, you can sponsor a well. These people are going to have access to clean and safe drinking water forever. Is that something you'd be comfortable with? Question mark, pause. Right? That's how we raise money. All right. Also along the lines of individual donors, but this is especially true online, which is funny because I call it the Sally Struthers effect. And if you remember, way back in the day, they had those commercials for the price of a cup of coffee. This kid's gonna, stay in school for a year. But the idea is it's about ROI. It's about what does it cost? What do I get in return? In a modern day equivalent, if you've ever looked at Heifer International, these guys really have it dialed. Go look at their donation page and see what it looks like to give $50 and this family is going to have a calf and have milk and meat. For $100 they get a cow. For $500 they get a flock of sheep. It's super concrete, And yet there's also language there that very gracefully says, hey, these are just examples. It's really general operating support. We're not going to give away a cow when you give us $100, but to help you understand what's possible with that gift, right? So they really do a masterful job of that, kind of spelling out the incremental impact that your gift will make possible. Or said another way, Kay Sprinkle Grace, the fundraising guru who I interviewed for the major donor chapter in my book, likes to say that people don't give to you, they give through you. Right? You are a channel. And ultimately, when you're raising money, you're not raising it for yourself or even for your organization. You're raising it for those women that have breast cancer, for those kids that don't have books, for the health and safety of our planet. That's where the money's going. You're just a conduit. So never forget that when you're raising money. We are all just a medium, right? A channel. And ultimately, people don't give to you because you have needs, is the other thing that Kay likes to say. They don't give to you because you have needs, they give to you because you meet needs. So what are the needs that you're meeting? Now, in an online environment, especially crowdfunding campaigns and things like that, oftentimes you'll have a donation string, it's called, where you have these default donation levels, and each of those levels will have some kind of impact associated with it. Really powerful, and I'm going to talk more about this in just a second, because what I want to connect the dots to here, as it relates to your online giving, is the importance of your donate page. So how many of you are taking online donations for your cause right now? Sweet, everybody. So if you know the organization Network for Good, they have transacted over $1 billion from donors to nonprofits over the last 20 years or so. Okay, $1 billion. These guys are like the Google for Good, the portal for channeling money into a huge amount of nonprofits. So we're talking about a very popular store. Well, they did a little experiment. They turned their donate button from gray to red, and in an instant got 30% more online donations. Gray to red. We're talking about $1 billion player, like not a small little trifle, right? This is a big deal. And to put that in context, there are in fact 3 little experiments that I would invite every single one of you here to do over the next 2 months at most. And I promise you, if you take the time to do these, you will double your online fundraising within those 2 months. So let me get into it. I talked about the donate button. So first of all, you might have heard of this notion of an A-B split, A-B testing, where you kind of have a control group, your donate button as it stands today, and then you have an experiment. Let's see what happens if we go from gray to red. Or maybe we'll try blue or green, or maybe we'll make it a circle instead of a square, or maybe we'll change the font. But the point is you're changing one variable. And then you're looking at a key metric to identify whether or not it's better or worse, and ultimately you're optimizing. That's the goal here through this process. And the metric for this first test, where you're optimizing your donate button, is what percentage of the visitors that come to your website click on that button. It's the only variable that matters, and ultimately what we want to move away from is embracing our gut. Well, I think the red button looks good. I think the green button looks good. Who cares? What does the data say? Oh, well, guess what? The purple button is what really pulls. By a 30% margin, we're going purple. Okay? And so the idea is you can use a free tool like Google Analytics. This is a great intern project. 3 days we're going purple. 3 days we're going red. 3 days we're going green. 3 days we're going square. Then we're going triangle. Whatever. After a period of a couple weeks, you've tested all these different options, and you know that green triangle is the one that gets most of the people to click by a significant margin. All right, we have our new donate button. Test number 1 is complete. Test number 2 is the donation string, the default donation levels. Someone clicks on donate. Do they see give $20, $50, $100, $500, and other? Or do they say give $100, $500, $1,000 other? I don't know. The answer will be different for every organization here. But I guarantee you that it's not what you thought it would be, and that it's worth experimenting with. And the way to do that is to try these different donation strings, these different combinations of amounts. As a starting point, bear in mind, the goal is to maximize your average online gift. That's the metric we're looking at for the next 2 tests, right? So when we get a contribution, is the average $86, $100, $200, and in general across all nonprofits, the average is $92. And in general, what you want to do, the research shows from a psychology standpoint, nobody likes to be cheap. For the most part, people skip over the first gift amount. The second one is really critical. And in general, if your average online gift is the standard $92, make the second one $100. You want to go a little bit above that average amount because that's going to be the most common gift amount probably, and you want to use it to push up your average giving amount. So maybe it's 50, 100, 500 other. But then experiment with it and try different combinations and look at what optimizes the average gift amount. Let's spend a couple weeks doing that. Cool. Now the final one.
I'm sorry, I don't quite get that. So, you would say for like a week, your range would be 25 to 250. Then your second option might
Not
be
just the overall range, the exact number. So it's 25, 50, 100, 250 other, or is it 50, 100, 500 other, or is it 100, 500, 1,000 other, right? You're probably going to want 4 or 5 sort of default options, and then you always want other for that person who decides to write in like $10,000 or something, which is getting increasingly common. But the point is you're playing with those numbers, right? And then you're looking at the metric, which is what combination of numbers optimizes or maximizes the average gift amount. Make sense? Yeah.
So I just want to have you address more your list up there, because in several of the organizations that I've worked in, a lot of the funding from foundations comes highly restricted.
Yeah.
This individual donor is a great way to get unrestricted
Absolutely.
funding. However, that donor list restricts all of that funding. If you donate $50 or more, the organization has to use it to buy 10 used textbooks, because that's what you're telling the donor you're going to do with it.
There are some semantics here, and that's why I would suggest looking at Heifer International. They do the most artful and eloquent job articulating that these are just demonstrative examples. We're not actually going to buy textbooks with that $50. It's going into general operating support, but this is just helping you wrap your head around what kind of impact $50 can make. And if you're not the kind of group that is feeding the homeless, where you could say for $100 we can feed 5 people, which is helpful from a standpoint of this, but a lot of nonprofits, when I was running Craigslist Foundation, I couldn't do that. And so in that case, what I would suggest when you think about these different levels of impact is think about it in terms of personnel time. Well, for $100, that's 3 staff hours. We could mentor 8 children with that amount of time. Right? Joanne?
I was just going to say it's the same thing, changing the word from that will do this to it.
Exactly. So a lot of it is about wording, and as opposed to spending a whole workshop on how to articulate that, I'm saying, like, look at Heifer International. They've got it dialed. And I would copy and paste. Yeah.
And then you have on the top, help raise money.
Yeah, so this is more from a crowdfunding type example where it's like you can either give or you can become a fundraiser. And I do other workshops on fundraising with social media, and sort of the punchline there, which I'll talk a little bit about, is how can you turn your donors into fundraisers? That's the big opportunity that social media represents. So we'll talk more about that in a sec. But the idea here is we've optimized our donate button, we've optimized the default donation amounts, or the gift string as it's known, and then finally it's what's the impact associated with each. And again, we'll have a brainstorming meeting, we'll come up with, now that we know $50 is the starting point, what are 3 things we could do with $50? Cool, let's try them each and let's see which one maximizes the average gift amount. Let's do that with 100, let's do that with 250. And now we've got the best donate button possible, the best donation stream possible, and the best impacts possible. And within short order, no more than 2 months, you've got double the amount of money coming through your website. And if anybody proves me wrong, by the way, please let me know, because so far I've been like telling everyone I know that I guarantee you will double your online fundraising results with this in 2 months, and I've yet to find one person that has proven me wrong. So let's get back to the social fundraising stuff that you just mentioned there. So the idea here is that when someone donates, it is absolutely critical that on the thank you for giving page, you are presenting them ideally with 2 buttons. Aside from saying, thanks so much for your support, because of you, these children are going to have access to clean and safe drinking water for life. The thing you want right below that is click here to share on Facebook, click here to share on Twitter, and when they click that, up pops a little window that says, I just gave $50 to the Foundation Center for their annual campaign. Please join me in supporting their great work. And here's a link. Right? When you do that, your fundraising results, this is even beyond the test I just talked about, your fundraising results will typically double, anywhere from a 20 to a 200% increase when you socialize the giving experience. And ultimately what you're doing is you're turning your donors into fundraisers. Really huge opportunity. Most platforms will offer this, and you need to make sure whatever you're using to take donations online, that functionality is front and center. Absolutely critical. Let's talk quickly about raising money from corporations, because like foundations, this source of institutional capital can be really helpful. You can get some big checks, and it can also come with some strings, but also with some benefits. And what I've discovered is, there was this Newsweek article 20 years ago almost now that said checkbook philanthropy is dead, and I don't necessarily agree with that. I think some people do just want to write a check. But the reality is, especially with corporate philanthropy, it's really helpful to sort of date before you get married and to build up that relationship. So let me ask you all a very serious question, which is, how many of you like beer? All right. Not exactly my kind of people. I would have liked to have seen more hands go, but I'm sorry. Well, I like beer, and I like Lagunitas beer. It's organic. It's very tasty. And they're incredibly generous. If you ever do a nonprofit event, ask them for beer, and they will give you as much beer as you want, always. It's actually ridiculous. I've never had them say no, and I've asked them for a lot of beer over the years. They're awesome. Just fill it out on their website. But the point is, in-kind fundraising, which I in fact devoted a whole chapter to in my book. And when I was running Craigslist Foundation, I started that thing out of my bedroom with no budget. By the time I grew it to a $2 million organization a year, half of our budget was from in-kind support, from media partners, from people donating beer and other stuff, from volunteer time. So it's a lot easier to get stuff than it is to get money. And guess what? Your budget has income and it has expenses. When we think about fundraising, we always think about the top line of revenue. We don't often enough look at how we can cut our expenses. And in-kind is a great, great opportunity in corporate partnerships. Same thing with media sponsors. I've done a lot of nonprofit conferences. The Chronicle of Philanthropy has promoted a lot of those. Here in San Francisco, I've worked with all the radio stations and TV stations, and had billboards on the Bay Bridge, and all free. It's so much easier to get stuff than money. So that's great. But the other thing that you can do is you can start to engage companies around corporate volunteerism. Have a gaggle of Google people show up and build a playground, or feed the homeless, or whatever it might be. And guess what? It is so insanely easier to get money from that corporation once their employees have served on the board or volunteered. And in fact, many of them have matching programs that are not just financial matching. They will give you cash for those volunteer hours. So this is a really great way to unlock corporate support. And it's like dating. Once you've kind of initiated the relationship and they've written you a check, it's a lot easier to go back and ask for a bigger one and show them what you've already done with the support they gave you and what would be possible if they could increase that by adding a little zero. All right. This is another gimme, because this is a perfect softball that, just like the beer thing, I think I've met one person in the last 15 years that have ever been turned down for a Google grant, which is one of the best kept secrets I've come across in the nonprofit sector. Anybody familiar with these? Already have one? Sweet. We're in San Francisco, so we have the tech-savvy crowd. Well, the point here is that Google has a grant program, google.com/grants, where they will give any registered nonprofit in over 60 countries $10,000 a month to advertise on Google. And it's not real money that you can take to the bank or do anything else with other than advertise on Google. But when you search for something on that search engine, you get these sponsored links at the top. Well, the way that happens is through a platform called AdWords, where people bid by the click for that positioning. Google will say, oh, you're a great nonprofit, and it's not that hard. It takes about an hour to fill out the application. Boom, here's a $120,000 ad budget. You don't use it, it goes away, but it's there for you to use. You're going to need to spend a couple hours to get up and running, maybe a couple hours every month or two to optimize your campaign. Another great intern project. There's also firms that will manage this for you and really help you get the most out of that platform. But ultimately, it's a great opportunity to drive a lot more traffic to your website from a donation standpoint, an advocacy standpoint, you want people to volunteer, sign petitions, whatever it might be, how would a $120,000 ad budget help you with that? And now bear in mind that there are some restrictions. You're limited to no more than $2 per keyword, so you're not going to get homelessness or breast cancer. You're going to have to get breast cancer research in California, or these kind of long tail keywords where it's a phrase, a couple more words, which on the plus side is going to be more specific, so that traffic is going to be more targeted. But you are going to want to spend an hour or two in a brainstorming session with your staff coming up with a list of like 300 keywords and phrases, and then starting out with all of those. So it is something that takes a little bit of time, but when I was at Craigslist Foundation, we actually maxed out and used all 10 grand a month of our Google grant, and then they gave us up to 50 grand a month, and we had to spend 5 cents on the dollar for anything above the 10K. So they're really, really generous with this, and most people don't know about it, so I really encourage you to look at that program. The next thing that I want to talk about, and this was really a theme that came up, I interviewed over 70 people in the book, and one of the things I heard the most is don't treat your supporters like an ATM, right? Like, don't only talk to people or foundations or companies or any kind of supporter in a way where you're only asking them for stuff, and that's the only time they hear from you. That is the easiest way to burn out a relationship. And one of the things in the business world that people say all the time is it's 7 times more expensive to acquire a new customer than to maintain one. Same thing's true with donor stewardship, right? So how do you maintain these donor relationships, these foundation relationships, these corporate relationships in a way that at the same time advances your mission and makes you feel better about your work and makes them really understand the impact? And I want to share this could be online, it could be something you do with your board, but this is about a 30-second video that I think does a really powerful job, just saying thank you in a way that's really beautiful. Is the sound going to come out of this, by the way?
Oh.
All right. Cool.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay. Oh, come on.
Do you want to try opening it in a different window?
I've never seen this happen before. All right. Basically, it's a bunch of kids saying thank you. And they all kind of look at the camera and just say, thank you for giving, thank you for giving, thank you for giving. And it's super cute. It's not like a Steven Spielberg production. It's just a bunch of kids looking at the camera and like little clips saying thanks. These are the people that you're really helping. Again, the money's not going to your organization or to you personally. It's going to those kids. Let them say thank you. Get a cell phone camera and just take a short little Vine video of them saying, you rock, thanks for giving. I'm so happy to have this new playground or these books or this food. Like, get out of your own way, basically, and let them tell that story. All right, well, super cute video, I promise. All right, final thing I wanted to touch on, and we will have time for a couple questions, is earned income and social enterprise. And this is something that, especially when the last economic downturn happened, a lot of nonprofits started scratching their heads saying like, well, gosh, do we really want to rely wholeheartedly on donors and foundations and companies that when the economy tanks are going to dry up again and again? We're in San Francisco, we know the idea of the bubble booming and bursting. And it's a cycle. It is going to happen. How do we stabilize? Well, maybe we should create a social business. It's a conclusion a lot of different groups reached. I dedicated a whole section of the book on it. And, the first and foremost consideration to keep in mind if you're thinking about that is you have double the amount of homework as every other entrepreneur here in Silicon Valley when they're thinking about, hopefully they're thinking about this, although I've met a lot who aren't, is this a viable business opportunity, right? Like, you need to make sure that this thing makes financial sense, of course. But as a nonprofit, you have a charter. You have been given an IRS determination letter to pursue a social mission, and it is illegal and immoral for you to do things that don't do that. So just because there's no laundromat in your neighborhood doesn't mean you should be starting one. because it's a good business idea, unless part of your social mission is ensuring access to clean clothing for low-income populations or whatever, and you donate half of the laundry services to them, or, if it ties in, then great, but absolutely mission first has to be a primary consideration, and on top of that, the homework all these Silicon Valley hoodies should be doing as well, which is there really a business idea there, right? So bear that in mind. The other thing I want to say is that there's some good news here, because one of the communities, for me, my work in the world, I talked about this notion of helping people help. The other kind of mantra that I have and focus of my entire professional career is around financing social change. And that's a coin with two sides in my mind. One of them is nonprofit fundraising. That's the new book. That's this workshop. The other side is impact investing. And this is now the fastest growing aspect of financial services. If you've heard about the divest invest movement, or this notion of, gosh, maybe I want to invest my financial resources in a way that's in line with my values, and if I'm a foundation dedicated to promoting the environment, maybe my endowment shouldn't be sitting in ExxonMobil and Chevron Texaco. Right? And I could be a person or a company or foundation, but just this concept of aligning capital with values is something that is really exploding. It's a very exciting movement, and part of that movement is the field of impact investing, where people like me will invest money in an enterprise that will give me my money back and has as much likelihood of as any other business opportunity of getting me a good market-based return, and it also generates social and environmental impact. To me, that's part of this notion of how do we make change irresistible? And that's why we need to tell good stories. That's why we need to present opportunities where it's like, even if you don't believe in climate change, you should be investing in solar energy because there's a huge business opportunity there, right? And so the point is, there is now a field, there is an industry around impact investing. It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry, and there are people looking to support social businesses like the ones that could come out of this room. And those people like to hang out together. They're kind of fun to party with, actually. So the good news is there are places you can go, and I'll share a couple key forums where you can connect with those folks. The bad news is it is still fundamentally and inherently more difficult to raise money for a nonprofit business than a typical for-profit business. The biggest reason is the liquidity events are a little bit more difficult. Like, if I invest in the next Facebook, well, when they go IPO or get bought by today's Facebook, I get a bunch of money, right? With a nonprofit business, it's quite a bit more complicated. You can't, sell your nonprofit. You're not going to have a going public type event. So as a result, you're going to get more scrutiny, and it's harder to raise money. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. You should just go into it with your eyes open. And to just give you a simple number, typically, if you're a for-profit entrepreneur, the management team will spend about 5% of their time raising money, and they'll do it in rounds, right? You've probably talked to people at a cocktail party that are like, we just finished our A round, and our seed round, and our B round, and our whatever, right? Meaning they're not fundraising all the time. It's like happening in bursts. And then they execute, and then they raise more money, and then they execute some more. If you're doing a nonprofit business, you should expect to raise money all the time, and it's going to be, a third to a half of your management's time. It's going to be a significant undertaking. Again, doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but just know that going into it. It's not like, oh, we'll just raise some money and then we'll be off to the races. No, we need to plan that we're going to constantly be needing to fuel this thing and raise money. And who knows, maybe we'll be lucky. Maybe we'll be really hyper successful and get this thing off the ground, and Ben and Jerry's starts putting our brownies into their ice cream and we're off to the races, like happened to Greyston Bakery. That can happen, but you can't plan for that. Now, in terms of where these folks like to hang out, like I said, they're really fun to party with. The Social Enterprise Alliance, se-alliance.org, excuse me, that is probably the most relevant for this community, in that it's a national network with regional chapters of nonprofits that have earned income social enterprises, right? So these are your people. If you're looking to start something like that, there's a local chapter. They have a great listserv across the nation. They have annual events. Definitely worth checking out. Another thing that happens locally, which is probably one of my favorite conferences in the world, is called SOCAP, as in Social Capital Markets. They also do some events in Europe, but the one here in San Francisco, which happens every September, is phenomenal. Huge gathering of funders, of impact investors, of entrepreneurs, especially social entrepreneurs and nonprofit entrepreneurs. Amazing event. Social Venture Network, svn.org. Their annual conference is coming up next month in San Diego. They also do one in the fall on the East Coast. But Social Venture Network is kind of like a country club for serial social entrepreneurs. So like the guys and gals that like are constantly starting really thriving social businesses and then selling them or taking them public, or they're on to the next thing and it's Plum Organics or it's Numi Tea or it's, you know, any of these really cool companies of tomorrow. Those guys all hang out at SVN, and that's a really fun party. Social Venture Partners is a group that has regional networks around the country. They're based in Seattle. If you know Full Circle Fund here, that's technically one of their branches. But they do engaged philanthropy. So this is a group of like investors that will invest in mission-related businesses and also in nonprofits. Really good network to look at. And then finally, Investor Circle is kind of like American Idol for your socially responsible business. They'll have a bunch of mission-led, for-profit enterprises get up and pitch a room full of impact investors. Might not necessarily be appropriate for you if you're a nonprofit business, but the other people in the room are worth getting to know. So I would try to show up to one of those. They do regional events all over the country. So with that, I think I'm going to end with, there we go. I want to end with one quick story, and then we'll have some time for questions, and also I have some books if anybody's interested. I want to share a story about a young actor who, when he was really even before his career took off, he was in college at university, and he went to this philosophy class. Thank you. He went to this philosophy class where there were 150 master's and doctorate students sitting around for 2 hours. And this one class, the professor got in front of the class, and he said, "Class, is this glass half full or half empty?" And the class kind of went round and round in circles. They spent 2 hours, 150 master's and doctorate students. And as you might imagine, they didn't really solve the age-old riddle. So this young celebrity kind of walks home. He's puffing and puffing. He's all despondent and super upset. His family had made a huge amount of sacrifices to put him not only through undergraduate but now graduate school. Here he is, surrounded by all these students, completely wasted time. He gets home. His grandmother's there waiting for him, and she says what grandmas pretty much always say when you get home from school, which is, "How was class today?" I don't want to talk about it. No, really, I want to know, how was class today? Well, if you got to know, it was incredibly frustrating. We had 150 master's and doctorate students sitting around for 2 hours, and all we did is debate if the glass were half full or half empty. And his grandmother Agnes, with a second grade education, mind you, without missing a beat, says, "Oh, that's easy. It depends on if you're pouring or drinking." Pouring or drinking. And the reason I wanted to end with the story and the connection to fundraising in particular is that the single biggest thing in my mind that is holding us as a sector, and in fact as a movement with a capital M back, from more effective fundraising is a failure of perception. And it's this mistaken notion that we have to beg for alms when we go out there to raise money. And although there's some physical truth to the fact that we do rely on the charitable contributions from people and organizations to do our good work, ultimately, we are not the drinkers, people. We are the pourers. We are the nurturers of society. And what we do as a sector and as a movement with a capital M is we connect people and organizations with resources to the change they want to see in the world. We are a channel, a conduit, like I talked about before. And I think it's really, really critical that each and every one of us not only remember that for ourselves, but that we tell our peers about this, our board members. This is an opportunity to invite people to align their resources with their values. And if it fits, great. And if it doesn't, that needs to be okay too. When you do fundraising right, it's always okay for someone to say no thank you. Just like when you invite someone to a party. So you don't need to take it personally. Right? And so I hope you keep that in mind as you move forward. And I really just want to thank each and every one of you for your time today, and also for the great work that you're doing. And I want to thank you not only on behalf of myself and on behalf of our hosts here at the Foundation Center, but I want to thank you on behalf of the thousands of people you collectively serve. It's really an honor to be with you. Thank you.